Do I need this platform? Should I move it? I think I need to move the platform. Yeah, right. That's better. Well, I think, you know, having heard what this young man said, the dream of Martin Luther King, today is International Peace Day, and we all know that around the world is not at peace. So what is our job? Our job, young and old, is to do whatever we can as individuals to make this a more peaceful world. So what I thought I would do, I want to start off with how I began, because maybe this has something to do with peace, I'm not sure. But I was born in London, in the United Kingdom. And when I was 5 years old, World War II broke out. And so I grew up knowing friends, family were being killed, those who were fighting in the Air Force and the Army and the Navy. I knew that cities in the UK were being bombed. I, in fact, was almost killed by a bomb. It's a long story, but I could very nearly not have been here when I was 5 years old. And when I came out of, you know, having lived through the war, and something I learned in the war, which so many people around the world are learning today, even though they're not living in war, was not to take everything for granted. So today, rich kids in the developed world, they expect to turn on a switch and there will be electric light. They expect to turn on a tap and water will flow. They expect, when they're hungry, there will be food on the table. In the war, when I was growing up, it wasn't like that. Food was rationed, and we only had a very small amount per person every day to survive. If we dropped food on the floor, we didn't throw it in the trash. We picked it up and we ate it because that's what kept us alive. And when I was 10 years old, the same age as this wonderful young man, I learned about the Holocaust after World War II. I learned what had been done by humans to humans. I learned how humans had been worked until they died. And if they couldn't work, if they were sick, they were sent into the gas chambers. That's what I learned when I was 10 years old. Well, as many of you know, I was 10 years old when I had my dream. And my dream was to go to Africa, live with wild animals, and write books about them. Because when I was 10, 80 years ago, women didn't become scientists, but I always knew I wanted to write books. I loved books. I learned from books. I learned from being out in nature. I was born loving animals, and I spent every free minute I had watching the birds and the squirrels and the insects in my garden in England. And then I left school when I was 18, and I'd done really well. I came either second or third in almost every exam. But whereas all my friends went off to university, my family couldn't afford it. And so I had to get a job. So I learned shorthand and typing, a boring secretarial course, and I got a job in London. Then came the opportunity. So what I want to say to you is when I was 10, and I had my dream of going to Africa, everybody laughed at me. How will you do that? Well, your family doesn't have money. Back then, we didn't know much about Africa. It's a really dangerous place. There are fierce wild animals. They will kill you. There are cannibals. They will eat you. And you're just a girl. Jane, they said, dream about something you can achieve. Forget this nonsense about Africa. But my mother wasn't like that. my mother said, Jane, if you really want to do something like this, you're going to have to work really hard, take advantage of every opportunity, and if you don't give up, hopefully you find your way. That is the message that I've taken around the world, particularly to people in disadvantaged communities, particularly talking to young people whose families aren't wealthy. And I say to them, follow your dream. I can't tell you how many people have written to me and said, Jane, I want to thank you. You taught me that because you did it, I can do it too. And I wish my mother, my amazing mother, was alive to know how her message to me has impacted so many young people around the world. Anyway, as I've said, when I left school, I had to get a job, and I became a secretary. And then came opportunity. I got a letter from a school friend, and her parents had bought a farm in Africa, in Kenya, and she invited me. Go away. She invited me for a holiday. And yes, this is opportunity, getting to Africa, the place I always wanted to go. But okay, takes money. You had to have money for a return fare. They wouldn't accept you going into a country in Africa unless you could prove that you could get back. So I couldn't save money in London, where my job was, the capital of the UK. I had to get money by going home, where I didn't have to pay rent, and I worked as a waitress in a hotel around the corner, and it was jolly hard work. It wasn't the kind of hotels you have now where, you know, there are, I don't know, but people get jobs and they're protected. For me, it was, well, you had to be there early in the morning, you had to stay till late at night, you had to service your tables. And when I first arrived, I was the only non-professional wait staff in the hotel. And it was a group of Irish Catholics, and they resented me. They thought, oh, this woman will come in, and if she gets invited out by one of her fancy boyfriends, she'll leave us in the lurch. They didn't understand that I didn't grow up that way. I was brought up by my mother to say, if you do something, give it everything. Do it as well as you can. I didn't particularly want to be a waitress, but I worked hard, and eventually this community of Catholic Irish waiters and waitresses accepted me as one of them. And that was my first experience of learning about another culture. Anyway, okay, I saved up my fare. And in those days, there were some planes going from Europe to Africa, but they were very expensive, and we couldn't possibly afford to travel by air like that. So we traveled by boat, and I'll never forget that journey, leaving England, cold grey water. Gradually the water got bluer, gradually the air got warmer. One day I saw a flying fish. Oh, how magic was that? And then one day there were dolphins swimming around the boat. So the first place I set foot on African soil was Cape Town, right down at the bottom of Africa, with that lovely iconic Table Mountain. And I was so excited, I'm in Africa, finally I've got here. But there were two people there, friends of my mother's, and they had told her, we'll look after Jane while she's in Cape Town, while the boat gets refueled. And they took me around, and as I say, I was really excited. I'm in Africa. But then I began to notice on the doors into the hotels, into the doors into the restaurants, there were these Afrikaans words. And I asked my friends, what do those words mean? And they said, white people only. I wasn't brought up that way. my grandfather was a congregational minister, and he taught us that the color of our skin is not important. What is important is how we behave, who we are as individual humans. I couldn't wait to leave South Africa. And when I got to Kenya, it was a much better atmosphere because it was on the very brink of independence from British colonial rule. So then from there, I met Louis Leakey, famous paleontologist, anthropologist, and I went to see him at the museum. And he asked me so many questions about the animals and the birds that were in the museum collection. I wasn't particularly happy because they were dead and stuffed, and I was interested in animals that were alive. But nevertheless, there I was, surrounded by a group of people who could answer all my questions about animals, mammals, birds, reptiles, plants, etc. in East Africa. And the reason I could do that is because I'd followed my mother's advice. I'd learned everything I could about African animals, and I'd spent hours in the Natural History Museum in London. So I could answer many of Leakey's questions. Now, this is an important message for all of you. In your life, you may have to do something that you feel is boring, that you don't want to do. Just like me, when I did a secretarial course and took a secretarial job. But the amazing thing, when I met Louis Leakey that day, just 2 weeks before I met him, his secretary had quit, and he wanted a secretary, and there I was. So now I'm in a community of people who can answer all my questions about the mammals and the birds and the reptiles and so on. And Louis Leakey let me go with him and his wife. At that time, they were going for 3 months a year in the summer to search for human fossil remains in a place that's now very famous, Olduvai. Back then, no human remains had been found there, and all the animals were there. So I and this one other young girl were allowed to walk out every evening after the hard day's work. And one evening, I was walking along the bottom of the gorge, and I just felt something behind me. And I looked around, and there was a young male lion, fully grown, hair beginning to grow into a mane on his shoulders. And I think he was curious. He'd never seen 2 young English girls before. And my friend, Gillian, she said, "Oh, we should go and hide in those thickets." And I said, "Gillian, the lion will know where we are. We won't have a clue where he is." I said, "We need to climb up onto the plains." The lion is just curious. So that's what we did. And the lion followed us for, I would say, from about here to the trees at the back. And it was a bit scary, but it was exciting. I was face to face with a lion. And that evening, I think, around the campfire, Leakey decided I was the person he'd been looking for, he said, for 10 years, to study not just any animal, but the chimpanzees. Nobody had studied them in the wild before. We knew nothing about them. And so I got to Gombe National Park, and I was 26 years old. Back then, 26-year-old was much younger than a 26-year-old today. We were very naive. For 4 whole months, the chimpanzees ran away from me. And they take one look and disappear into the forest. I only had money for 6 months. I knew given time I could get the trust of the chimpanzees, but did I have time? Well, thank goodness after the 4 months, the one chimpanzee who began to lose his fear, I called him David Greybeard. And I saw him sitting on a termite mound, and I saw a hand reach out and pick a blade of grass. And I saw him push that blade of grass down into the termite mound, pull it carefully out, the termites were biting on with their jaws when he was eating them. So David Greybeard, as I called him, was using tools. And at that time, scientists thought that only humans used and made tools. And David was even making tools because sometimes he picked a leafy twig, and to make that into a tool, he had to strip off the leaves and the side branches. So that changed everything. Then Leakey was able to go to the National Geographic Society, and they gave money for me to carry on with the research. So now I could relax. And thanks to David Greybeard, who began to introduce me to the other members of the chimpanzee community, I began to learn about their behavior. And if there were chimpanzees up on the platform now, demonstrating various aspects of their behavior, you would understand them, because their communication in so many ways is just like ours. They can't speak, but when you greet somebody, what do? You embrace them. Maybe you kiss them. So do chimps. If somebody is eating food that you want, you beg from them, please give me a share. Chimpanzees do the same. Give me a share of your food. If you're angry with another male and you're an adult human being and you're in politics, you stand up to your political opponent and you look as big and strong as you possibly can. So do male chimpanzees. It's just the same, there isn't any difference. Hopefully many of you or most of you live in a family where your mothers care about you. So do chimpanzees. So in so many ways, they're like us. Now we're here on International Peace Day, and I would like to be able to tell you that chimpanzees have a peaceful life. It was a big shock to me to find out that chimpanzees like us have a dark and aggressive side. They're capable of violence. They're capable of a kind of primitive war. They're capable of killing. And it shocked me, and I was really, really unhappy. I thought they were like us, but nicer. But then I found out that just like us, they have a loving, compassionate, altruistic side to their nature. And so if a mother dies and she leaves a little infant, if he's 3 years old, he can survive without her milk, but he can't survive without a loving parent. And so if he doesn't have a brother or sister who will adopt him, he will be adopted or she will be adopted by another member of the group. So just like us, chimpanzees have a dark side, but they have a loving side. I could have stayed in Gombe learning about the natural world forever. It was they were the best days of my life. I could be out in the forest. I could be learning about the chimpanzees, or I could be just out there having this strong spiritual connection to the natural world, feeling the force of a great spiritual power. And I wanted to stay there for the rest of my life. So why did I leave? I left because I was discovering that all across Africa, chimpanzees' numbers were decreasing. Forests were being destroyed, their habitats. I left because I learned from secretly filmed footage the horrific behavior meted out to our closest living relatives in medical research, the cruel way they're trained for circuses or other entertainment, the way that people take on infants as pets and then find that when that darling little baby chimpanzee becomes 8 years old, they can be dangerous. And so they give them over to medical research to put them in 5-foot by 5-foot cages. Can you imagine? I've got all you young people sitting here. Imagine being taken from your family. Imagine being put in a 5-foot, measure it out, 5 foot is about here to there. And you live in that cage surrounded by iron bars, above you, beside you, and below you. and you may live there for 30 years. And I think that because of the horrible long-term record that we have as human beings. I mean, why are some of you here? Some of you young people are here because your fathers, your grandfathers were brought over as slaves. What terrible days those were. How could people treat your ancestors the way they were treated? Any more that during the Holocaust, Germans, Nazis, could treat people who were Jews or gypsies or mentally retarded. We have a nasty streak in us. And all of you young people, you're growing up into a world which is not a peaceful world. But we want to make a peaceful world, don't we? Isn't that why we fly doves of peace? Isn't that why that great song, and if you didn't hear the words, try and hear them, Circle the World. The time to come has come to end the guns. I think on this day of peace, the most important message is that we have screwed up. We have not behaved in a way that's very beneficial to each other, to animals, to the natural world, and to each other. But you young people have a different road ahead of you. And Roots and Shoots is trying to gather up young people like you from around the world to say, the time for change has come. That's what the song says. The time for change has come, and you are the change. You are the young people who will create a new society. You are the young people who will determine who gets into politics. You are the young people who decide we don't want to buy products that have harmed the environment. We don't want to buy products that have harmed animals. We don't want to buy products that are cheap because people over there are being given unfair wages. You can affect the way that business does its business. It's happening. It's happening now. And when I was asked, you know, I'm a UN messenger of peace, and I was asked to make a message for Peace Day. And I thought, that's not easy this year because around the world there's so little peace. But you know something? Every single major religion, whether it's Catholic, whether it's Protestant, whether it's Muslim, whether it's Hindi, whatever, every single one has the same main message. It's called the Golden Rule. And the Golden Rule says, do to others what you would wish them to do to you. And if you say others includes animals and includes the environment, can you imagine what the world would be like if we all obeyed that rule, whether in our societies, in our families, between countries, between religions? Wouldn't that be a wonderful world? So let me ask all of you, particularly you young people, is that world a possibility? Do you believe that together we can make that world a possibility, a world of peace? Is that possible?
Yes.
You're saying yes. Well, yes, yes, yes. That world is possible. But it's only possible if every single one of us does our bit. And the reason that I go around the world talking about hope is because if we lose hope, if you don't hope that what you're doing is going to make a difference, why bother to do it? So if you lose hope, you become apathetic. Well, it doesn't matter what I do because it's not going to make a difference, so I won't bother. That's happening. That is what we've got to change. If people don't have hope, they don't take action. And so I'm telling people there is hope. We can slow down climate change. We can slow down loss of biodiversity. We can change corporations. We can change government policies. But only if we get together. And it's the young people today that give me the most hope. Because you have passion, once you understand the problems, and once you are empowered to take action, which is what Roots and Shoots does, then you can stand up and make a difference. So I'm talking to all of you down here. Do you believe that you can make a difference? So yes, you can make a difference. Are you prepared to fight to make that difference? Right, that's the message for Peace Day. Fighting is not a word that's associated with peace, but if we're fighting for freedom, for justice, justice to people, justice to sentient animals, then fighting is a good word. And so the message I have on this International Day of Peace is, remember, every single day you live, every single day you're on this planet, I'm talking to all of you, you make a difference. And you can choose what sort of difference you make. And I beg you to remember that when I first went to Cambridge University to talk about chimpanzees, I was told, you shouldn't have given them names. Chimpanzees, animals you're studying, should have numbers. You can't talk about them with personality. You can't talk about them with minds capable of making decisions. And you certainly can't talk about them having emotions like happiness, sadness, fear. Do you know why I could stand up against those scientists, those erudite scientists, when I hadn't even been to university? Because I had a wonderful teacher when I was a child, and that teacher was my dog. How many of you have a pet, a dog or a cat or a rabbit or a horse or whatever? Yeah, many of you. You know, don't you, animals can feel happy or sad. You know that they deserve a name. And you know that they have intelligence. Now we know it's not only chimpanzees and apes, it's not only elephants, it's not only whales and dolphins, but we find birds can be amazingly intelligent. I could tell you so many stories, but we don't have time. And we find out that rats, but rats? My goodness. Some of you can Google 5 smart rats. You will be amazed. We have these so-called factory farms where billions of animals around the world are crowded and treated inhumanely in these terrible places. Well, there's a pig. You can Google this as well. There's a very famous artist called Picasso, but if you Google Picasso, Pigcasso, you will be amazed. This is a pig rescued from becoming bacon. Her rescuer was an artist, and she realized that this pig she rescued was fascinated to watch her painting. So she set up an easel, and she put a paintbrush in the pig's mouth, and the pig dipped it into the paint and started painting. That Picasso, her paintings sell for $5,000. She's not unique, she's just a pig. Pigs are as intelligent as dogs. So just remember that every animal in these factory farms, treated so abominably cruelty, is an individual with a personality capable of feeling fear, pain, and think about it. We need to change industrial farming. So I won't go on, but on this Day of Peace, the last message is, it's not just peace within each other, between our colleagues at school or business, between members of our family, between countries. It's peace between us and the environment. It's peace between us and the animal kingdom, of which we know we're part. And so take away from this Peace Day a feeling of, yes, we can, yes, we will, yes, we must. And I want us all to say that together. So we can change the world. We know how to do it. We know what we must do and what we mustn't do. But do we have the will to do it? We must. So let us all stand up. Come on, up you get. You've been sitting too long, you're getting bored. Go stand up and say with me, together we can, together we will, together we must. Now again, 1, 2, 3. Together we can, together we will, together we must change the world. Thank you.